All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Tafshin Pei Hey, the Tilsa Mishpacha Beretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this year in the schus of Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Stephen Terry Zin, in honor of the birth of their granddaughter Dvar Eliana Zin, and in memory of Dr. Zin's father Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Livracha, Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, and the schus of Fushlim of four rabbins, cousins serving in the IDF, Yomi Chaim Pesach Ben Moshe Chana, a commission of the yard site of Rabin's mother, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim Zichron Livracha. Dr. Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Dr. Gevant's parents, Yaakov Meir ben Moshe Leib and Shana Bas Abba. Dr. Bezadi Yamina Salfer of Los Angeles, in the merit of a refuah shalema for Esther Bracha Bas Chaya. And our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Baruch and Bracha Rifkin, in commission of the yard site of Krendel Bas Label Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Sav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kodesh Baruch Hu Shneimeret Hashem, bring back our hostages, b'shalom and b'karov, and allow our soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Kuf Nun Hey, 155, right? Yeah? Good, excellent. Good, thank you. We are picking up on Kuf Nun Dalit Amud Beis 154b, and I believe we left off. Rabbi Zera? No, we did that. I'm sorry, where do we leave off? Shtar Pasim, where is that? Oh, middle of the oven. Okay, fantastic. Okay, Imam Shtar Pasim, that right there? Okay, so we'll say, so remember again, we're dealing over here with, well, in general, the backdrop to all of this, of course, is the machlokes between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanon in the Mishnah. So remember again, I will say, if we have this situation where the Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, we have the situation where halacha l'maisa, again, Reuven gave Shimon a gift. Reuven claims that he was a shchimira who subsequently recovered, therefore the gift is void. Shimon claims that Reuven was a bari, and therefore there's a matnas bari, and therefore the gift is not retractable. So how do we resolve this? Rabbi Meir says the burden of proof ultimately is upon Reuven to prove that he was a shchimira. Chacham say amotzi mechavero alav haraya. So again, we have a couple of different variations of this particular case. So the Gemara is talking about the following situation over here. Remember again, Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following situation that came up in the Mishnah Bar Kafra. Reuven was using a field uncontested for a certain amount of time. Shimon comes along and says, "It's mine," and he goes and Reuven says, "Yeah, it was yours, but you sold it to me." And Reuven produces a shtar. Shimon subsequently claims that halacha l'maisa again. Shimon says, I'm sorry, Im Amar Shtar Pasamhu, O Shtar Amana Shemacharti L'Chavalon Asatli Damim, Im Yesh Eidim Halach Achar Eidim, Ve'im Lav Halach Achar Hashtar. So I'll say, so remember again, let's say Shimon goes ahead and claims, Shimon claims it is a shtar, but at the end of the day, this is a Shtar Pasim. Remember again, as we spoke about in yesterday's daf, Shtar Pasim is the shtar that I gave you in order to make you look wealthier than you actually are, or Shtar Amana, I gave you the shtar in advance of payment of the funds, but you never actually paid me. So what's the halacha? Yesh edim halach achar edim ve'im lav halach achar shtar. If there are witnesses who could corroborate the shtar, then fine. But if not, we follow after the shtar. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir he da amar mod b'shtar shekasa en tzarach l'kaimo. So shouldn't we say that this reflects the position of Rabbi Meir? Because Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa, that when both parties admit that a shtar was written, there is no need for kiyum shtaros. To which the Gemara says, "V'lo Rabbanon amar lo shani omer divrei hakol mod b'shtar shekas ve'en tzarach l'kaimo." So he responds, "No, I hold that everyone agrees that when the parties admit that they wrote the shtar, there is no subsequent need for any level of kiyum shtaros. There's no certification that's necessary. I v'ha miflag pligi, but that's not true. But l'maisa again, this is the subject of machlokes. This nan ein ne'eman on the posel. Div Rabbi Meir v'cham omrim ne'emanin. Yet we learned that the Eidim are not Ne'eman. The Eidim are not believed to undermine a shtar. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Chum say they are believed. If witnesses are strong enough to undermine a shtar, is one of the parties to the shtar strong enough? We didn't do this yesterday? No? Okay, so I must have just done this. Good. All right, sometimes I get further in my head than we actually get in the shir. All right, so the Gemara says like as follows. So remember again, this is going back to the Bnei Brak case. Remember the Bnei Brak case yesterday, where Lemaisa, again, there was the whole situation where they wanted to exhume the body. So the Gemara said, V'halo amrulei, v'halo mishmecha amru, yafe iru b'nei mishpacha. But yet, halacha might say, said in your name, that the Bnei Mishpacha and the Bnei Brak case, that it was proper for the family members to go ahead and request exhumation. Amrale zu Elazar amra ani lo amarti davar zemiolim. He said this. Elazar said, but again, I never said such a thing before. We'll explain this in just a moment. Rabbi Zera said, Im yichbar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar tamido. So if Rabbi Zera could go ahead and go against the statement of Rabbi Elazar, his Talmud, Yichbar Rabbi Yanai Bino, Rabbo, could he go ahead and go against the statement of Rabbi Yanai, his Rebbe? What did Rabbi Yanai say? Rabbi Yanai, Amar Rebbe, Mode Bishtar Shekasvu, Eno Tzarech Lekaimo. That Allah, if you go ahead and you're molded by a shtar, but if all the parties involved are molded that the shtar was properly written, there is no need for kiyum shtar. So Amar Le Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lo Mishnah Seinu Huzu. Is this not our Mishnah? The Chacham say Hamotzi Mechaber Ala Haraya. So again, our Mishnah, right back to our Mishnah, Macholuk Shamer and the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, Ein Raya Ela B'Kiyum Shtar. There is no raya except for proper certification of the document. Baram nirin divrei Rabbeinu Yosef, dam Rabbeinu Yosef. But nevertheless, we seem to accept the position of Rabbeinu Yosef. What does Rabbeinu Yosef say? So the Gemara says, dam Rabbeinu Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, zu divrei chachamim. Avar Rabbi Meir Omer Mode b'shtar shekasvu sarech lekaimo. The Rabbi Meir holds that even if the parties admit to the shtar, it still requires a kiyum shtaros. Umay divrei hakol. So why does it say divrei hakol? The Rabbanon legabe Rabbi Meir divrei hakol. That the Rabbanon, which is the majority position, when you compare the Rabbanon position of the Rabbanon to the position of Rabbi Meir, we call that divrei hakol. The Gemara says v'ha ipcha says all going to come together in just a moment. V'ha ipcha tnan. But we learn just the opposite. The Chacham say motzi mechaver lavaraya. That the Chachamim say Motzi Mechaver Alavaraya. Epoch, switch that around. I've Hatanya Ein Ne'eman in the Poslo, Divrei Rabbi Meir. But yet we learn, the Brisa says that they are not Ne'eman, the Eidim are not Ne'eman to pass a shtar. These words Rabbi Meir, the Chacham Obim Ne'eman, the Chacham say they are Ne'eman. V'hatani Rabbi Yochanan. Raya be'idim kam. Rabbi Yochanan says we're talking about again a raya proof brought by the witnesses. To which the Gemara says ipoch. Switch those shitas around as well. Leima lepoch nami tiyufta. But even in the inverted form, could this not refute what we said before? To which the Gemara says lo. Top of kuf nun hey. Haki kamarle. This haki kamarle Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon. We'll say Ksuf 155a. Haki kamarle Rabbi Yochanan. Sorry. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon, Lakish. So we'll say this is what Rabbi Yochanan is saying to Rish Lakish. Bishtamal didi da'amina raya b'kim ashtar hainu demishkachas lei denachsi lekuchos lenachasim. So we'll say this. Rabbi Yochanan says to Rish Lakish like this. According to me, that ultimately again, that the raya, that the proof is taking place through the shtar, this is where you could go ahead and come to a case, going back to the Bnei Brak case, where the purchasers have possession of the property, or they could come to possession of the property. But according to you, where you say raya, remember again, this is talking about hamotzi mechaver alav haraya. Also remember again in the beginning of yesterday's daf, according to the position of the Chachamim, where there is this machlokes. Giver claims he was a shchimira. Purchaser or recipient claims that he was a bari. So we have a machlokes. How do they prove the case? Remember again, Rabbi Meir says the burden of proof is upon the giver. The whole avod of yesterday's daf was machlokes Rav Huna and Rav Chisda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. Ultimately, again, about what kind of raya. Is it a raya be'edim or is it a raya b'shtar? So now the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Yochanan says Rish Lakish like this. According to me, who says that the raya that we're talking about, the motzimei chaver alav raya, that raya is with kiyum shtaras. Then hainu demishkachas leidinachsi lekuchos lenachasim. So then I understand in the Bnei Brak case, how the purchasers could come to possess the property by upholding the shtar. Remember again, I'm both saying in the Bnei Brak case, the brothers claimed that the brother who sold the property was a minor, therefore the sale was invalid. The purchasers say he was a gadol. How could they prove their claim? By upholding the document. El ledidach da amrit raya be'edin heiche mishkachas ladinach But according to you who holds that raya is through witnesses, how are you ever going to have a case of halacha l'maisa where you could have witnesses that would prove that he was a gadol? To which the Gemara says, Amrlei modina lacha be'ir de b'nei mishpacha de lav ir. I agree with you that halacha l'maisa, that the claim in this case, in the Bnei Brak case, that the claim of the mishpacha is not a valid claim. Let's remember again, let's go back to the Bnei Brak case just for one more moment. You had a father who died, Yaakov left behind 3 sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Levi sold off estate property. Then Levi died. So what happened? Purchasers come to go ahead and collect on the property. Reuven and Shimon, what do they claim? They claim the sale was void. Why was the sale void? Right? Because he was a minor. So remember again, this is where they went to Rabbi Akiva. They wanted to exhume the body, and Rabbi Akiva made the double statement. Number 1, we don't go ahead and desecrate the dead for monetary claims. And number 2, simanin asuyin lehishtanos. So simanin, physical signs, change after death. So either way, this exhumation is not going to accomplish anything. So the answer to that is no. So the Gemara says, depending on how you understand the motzi mechaver alav haraya, the particular raya, will determine how this case works, right? So if you hold that a motzi mechaver alav haraya is kiyum shtaras, is certifying the document, then okay. As long as the purchasers certify the document, they have a right to claim the property. But if you hold that it's edim, what do you can have edim on? That he was a gadol? It would be strange to have edus like that. That's how you would actually know that he's a gadol, to which the Gemara says, you're right. So ultimately, again, Reish Lakish says back to Rabbi Yochanan, I agree with you. I happen to agree that in this case, the claim of the family is not a valid claim. The Bnei Brak case, the claim that the brothers make, Reuven and Shimon, that Levi was a minor, is not a valid claim. Why? Listen to this. My kamar, because what's Reuven and Shimon's claim? What's their claim? Katan haya. That Levi was a katan. That's their claim. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why it doesn't work. Chazaka ein ha'idim chosman al ashtar el imkein naaseh gadol. That halacha l'maisa, there's a chazaka. What's the chazaka? Witnesses will not be party to a transaction unless they know that the parties involved are adults. So we'll say, essentially what Reish Lakish is saying like this, Rabbi Yochanan, is witnesses do not want to be part of something that is a fraudulent transaction. Why? Because at the end of the day, that then erodes their own credibility. They don't want that. So halacha l'maisa, even Reish Lakish will agree with Rabbi Yochanan that in Bnei Brak case, the family doesn't really have a taina, because their taina is Levi was a katan at the time of the transaction, which would then mean that the witnesses witnessed and signed on a document for a katan. No one's going to do that. No one's going to do that. Chazaka, that people do not testify on behalf or do not engage in a transaction on behalf of a katan. Okay, so we'll say, so let's pause here for just a second. This is kind of the end of this sugya. So remember again, I will say, what was this sugya actually about? At the end of the day, right? Great question. Right, what was this? So again, what this sugya actually was about was we came away with many different important pieces of nuggets of information, but one of the most important pieces that we came away with was this concept that historically shtaros reflected the state of being of the grantor. Right, of the person making the transaction. So for example, it would have been common, if somebody was a bari, it would have been common that what would they have written in the shtar? When I was healthy, walking in the shuk, right, and I was walking on my own 2 feet, I gave this gift. I sold this piece of property, right? So not really the sales. Sales don't matter. This is really an issue of gifts more than anything. I gifted this property. Okay, that would show that it was a matnas bari. Conversely, if a person was a shchimira, what would it say? I was laying in my deathbed and I granted this piece of property to Reuven. That's how shtaras classically would be written, right? They would go ahead and they would indicate the state of being of the grantor. The reason, what was the topic of our Mishnah, and the whole topic of our Sugya, was, let's say a shtar didn't contain that. So the shtar has no indication, we'll call him Reuven. Was Reuven the giver a bari or a shchivmira? Which one was he? Which one was he? So remember again, the Gemara essentially says, so now, what happens? So let's play this out. Reuven gives a gift to Shimon, right? Reuven claims I was a shchivmira, and now I recovered. So what's the status of the gift? What's the status of the gift? Void, right? Shimon claims you were a bari, you were totally healthy, and therefore the gift is an irreversible gift. So now the issue is, Shtar doesn't point one way or the other. So machlokes, Rabbi Meir says it's on Ruvain to prove that he was a shchimira. Because remember, again, both say, well, just we could pull everything together now. Because why does Rabbi Meir say that? Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan holds. Excellent. Azlinon Basra Hashta. Right? We go ahead and we follow the present reality. So therefore, if Ruvain is presently healthy, he's a bari. We assume that was his status at the time of the giving of the gift as well. So Ruvain, you want to claim that you're a shchivme, that you were a shchivme at the time that the gift was made? Great. That burden of proof is upon you. The Chacham, on the other hand, say, what are you talking about? This is a classic case of Hamotzi Mechaver Lavaraya. Who has the property right now? Who has the property? Ruvain, right? Because remember again, Ruvain hasn't given anything away yet. So therefore, Shimon, you want to prove. So Ruvain's claiming, I don't owe you anything because I was a Shchimira, and Baruch Hashem, now I had a Refuah Shlema. Shimon says, I'm happy you had a Refuah Shlema, but you made a Matna Zbari, not a Matna Shchimira. So therefore, again, the Chacham say, Motzi Mechaver Lavaraya, the burden of proof is upon Shimon. You want to extract property from someone. The person who is in possession of the property is the presumed owner, unless, of course, you could prove otherwise, and therefore the burden of proof is upon you. That's our sugya. That's the whole sugya in a nutshell. Again, obviously, a lot of other information thrown our way over the course. So how do we paskin? Supposed to listen to this. So the Rambam says, this is in Hilchos Zechiyu Matana, Parak Tes, Halacha Chav Beis. Matana shehi stam. This is exciting. This is our case. So Reuven gave Shimon a gift, right? Stam. Did not indicate shchimira bari shvelonis parish ba shaya bari kishnasan or shaya shchimira. So he didn't indicate who omer shchimira hayisi v'harei amarati v'akzom matanasi. So Reuven claims I was a shchimira when I made the gift, and now Baruch Hashem had a refuah shalima, and therefore the gift is void. Umekabel matana omer bari haya ve'inu yachal aksar. On the other hand, Shimon, the recipient, says you were totally healthy, and therefore you have no right to renege. How do we paskin? Halachic drum roll, ala mekabel lahavi raya shebari haya. Ultimately, we pass like the Chachamim, which is not really a surprise, a little anticlimactic, right? Built it up more than it should have been. But we pass like the Chachamim, hamotzi michavero alav haraya. Good, that's it, and therefore the burden of proof is upon Shimon to prove that Reuven was really a bari if he wants to extract the property. Beautiful. All right, to both say Veiter. Veiter, some great Gemara ahead of us now. Here we go. Itmar. We'll say we are in Kuf Nun Ham with Aleph 155a. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom, 11 lines up. Itmar. So we'll say, so this is actually very interesting. So the truth is, this doesn't really have so much to do with our sugya. The tie-in is katan. Remember again, in the Bnei Brak case, the surviving brothers Reuven and Shimon were claiming that Levi had no right to sell off estate property because he was a katan. So he says, by the way, at what point in time does a katan have the ability to sell off estate property? Now, both say, let's say, if you look at the Rashbam says, katan, which is 3 lines up before it gets wide, hayorish nichse aviv shemes. We're dafka talking about a case where, at what point in time does a katan have the ability to sell off estate property? He inherited property. What age is he allowed to go out and sell off property? Now, let's say, if you take a look at the Rashbam, look at Me'ei Masai Mocher B'Nichse Aviv, Bekar Ka'osav, V'tehave Mechirasa Mechira. Second last Rashbam on the page. At what age is he allowed to sell off estate, real estate, and create a bona fide transaction? I both say, now watch this. You may remember this from our Gittin days. De'ilu gavi metaltali tnan. So I will say, this is dafka by karka. By metaltalin, there's a different halacha. Movable property. What's the halacha? First of the wide lines in the Rashbam. Hapuutos mekchan mekach umemkaran memkar b'metaltalin umefarshinan hasam kivarshev kol chad lefum charfei. It was interesting enough. By metaltalin, the halacha is the Rashbam brings down from Seches Gittin that a katan is allowed to sell metaltalin already from the age of 6 or 7. Right? It says kol echad lefum chorfei means every child in accordance with his sharpness. In other words, that this is child dependent. Now, why would we allow a katan to sell metaltalin from the age of 6 or 7? So Rashbam points out umishum kidei chayev takinu le'rabbanim metaltalin tetehavi mechira lemizonosav aval b'mekarkoi lo. Now I will say this was a special enactment for sometimes again the welfare of the child. Sometimes the child is on his own. child, remember again, I will say, from a certain age and on, there's not necessarily a halachic obligation upon a parent to go ahead and support their child, bless you, to support their child, and therefore halacha l'maisa, again, a child could be left without anything. So therefore, in order to ensure that the child has some level of support, Chazal allowed children to sell off metaltalin as long as they have reached an age where it's clear that they know what it is that they're doing. But karka is a different discussion. Karka is a different discussion. So now the Gemara asks, at what age is a katan allowed to sell off estate property? Karka. So the Gemara, let's go back to the Gemara. So interesting machlokes over here. Rava Amar Rav Nachman ben Shmona Esrei Shana. Rava says 18. 18 years old is the age in which a katan can begin to sell off real estate from the estate. Rav Huna bar Chinina Amar Rav Nachman mi ben Esrim Shana. 20 years old. So machlokes 18 versus 20. All right. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Masir Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera is the kasha. Ma'aseh beBnei Brak be'achad shemachar b'nechsei abev. So also now the Gemara brings up the Bnei Brak case again, right? Because remember again, that's the tie into this Gemara. The Gemara restates the case. What's the case in Bnei Brak? So Yaakov died, leaving behind 3 sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Levi went ahead and sold off estate property, umeis, and then Levi died. Uba'u b'nei mishpacha ve'iru lomar katan haya b'shas misa. And what happens? Reuven and Shimon come along and say, Levi's sale was void. Why? Because he was a katan at the time of his death, which means that the transaction was performed by a katan, which mees that it's void. Uba v'shalus Rabbi Akiva mahu lebotko, and they came and they asked Rabbi Akiva, can we exhume the body? Right? We'll say same case. Can we exhume the body? Amar lahem iatem rashan lenavlo. Rabbi Akiva says no, you cannot desecrate the dead. Furthermore, va'od simonin asuyin lehishtanos la'achar misa. Furthermore, again, even if he had simanim, physical simanim, you can't bring any proof from any physical signs after death because the body changes, the simanim change after death. Okay, that's the exact Bnei Brak story as we saw it before. So we'll say now the Gemara says like this. Right? So we'll say if you go according to Rava, right? Rava says that the age at which a child or the age at which a person has the ability, a child, an heir, has the ability to sell estate property is 18 years old. 18 years old. So if you go with 18-year-old, so we'll say Amud Beis, Hainu dika'asu va'amrile mal lebotko. So watch this. Then it makes sense that Reuven and Shimon, the surviving brothers, are coming to Rabbi Akiva and say, Rabbi Akiva, can we exhume the body to check his body for signs of physical maturation? Can we do that? Right? We'll say that makes sense. Take a look at the Rashbam. First Rashbam, Kuf Nun Hema Beis 155b. So Hainu da Amrulay Malabot Kushim Lo Imatsubo Saros Yachsiku Kikatan Ad Esim Kidim Farish Va'azil. V'dafka Le'inyan Limkar Benichse Aviv Tarti Ba'inan Shmona Seishana V'Saros. Aval Le'inyan Own Shemiz Asafai. So the Rashbam says, so you're going to see this is going to make a little bit more sense in just a moment. If you go with the idea that a child has to be 18 years old in order to sell property, estate property, karka, then I understand why they wanted to exhume the body to check for signs of physical maturation even at the age of 18. Now watch this, just look at the next line in the Rashbam. He says, Ella, I amrit mi ben esrim, ki bat kulei maihavi. But I will say, if you hold like the second opinion, namely, that he has to be 20 years old in order to be able to sell estate property, even if they check for signs of physical maturation, what does it matter? In other words, we'll say what that really means is like this. Even if he doesn't have signs of physical maturation, what does it matter? Why? V'atanan, we learned, ben esrim shelo hevi shtei saros, yavi raya shu ben esrim, v'hu asris. So we'll say, so remember again, halacha l'maisa, if by the age of 20, a young man does not go ahead and develop signs of physical maturation, so the halacha is he has to bring like his birth certificate, right? Bring proof that you're 20 years old, and at this point he's categorized as a sris. Now again, unlike a tumtum or androgynous, where there is gender ambiguity, that's not this case. A sris is male. A sris is male, but a sris is someone who fails to mature physically, and we assume is sterile as well, unable to have children. Able to have children. That's the general categorization of a sris. So the Gemara says if somebody reaches the age of 20 years old and doesn't exhibit any signs of physical maturation, but again, clearly he's male, we categorize him as a sris. What's the implications of being a sris? Ultimately, again, he doesn't do chalitza. We'll see that in just a moment. So we'll say, so now understand, just before we get into the sris, so just to understand what's happening over here. So therefore, if you hold, so let's go back to the Bnei Brak story. So the Bnei Brak story makes sense if you go with the idea that 18 years old is the age at which you could go ahead and sell property. Because even if he was up to 18 years old, if he didn't have simonim, he wouldn't be able to sell the property, be a katan for that purpose. But if you hold that it's 20, so I understand, by 20 years old, even if halacha l'maisa he didn't have simanim, he still would be categorized as a gadol, just as a sris. In other words, he would have a different categorization. So, in other words, if it's the age of 20, why would they even need to exhume the body? They don't even need to do that because by 20 already, you see, at 18, ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, failure to exhibit signs of physical maturation still may categorize you as a katan for real estate purposes, or for real estate sale purposes, for transactional purposes. But if by the age of 20 already you're not sprouting any type of signs of physical maturation, then halacha l'maisa say you're a gadol, you're halachic adult, but you're categorized as a sris. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says, "V'hu asris, v'hari hu sris, v'lo cholis, v'lo miyabim, kidarim biyabamis, v'lo karinam bei la hakim la achiv shem, v'chol she'ena ola liibum, ena ola lechalitza." So I'll say, so the idea over here is, the yibum is a din in establishing offspring for the deceased brother. So the surviving brother marries the widow under the assumption that he's capable of fathering children. If he's a sris, he's not capable of fathering children. So if there's no possibility of having children, then l'maisa, again, there's no din of yibum. There's no din of yibum. And if there's no din of yibum, remember from our Yavamis days, there's no din of chalitza. Alma, so finish up the Rashbam, Alma, mi ben esrim ve'ilach, afa gavdalo aisi saros kegolo machzikin alei. So what you see from here is once a man reaches the age of 20, even if he does not go ahead and display signs of physical maturation, he is still treated as a gadol. Umipnei shehu sris lo aisi saros. And only because ultimately, again, that he's a sris, that's why he didn't go ahead and bring forth physical signs of physical maturation. So if it's 20, so again, just going full circle, if the halacha really is the age of 20, then why would the relatives Reuven and Shimon have asked for exhumation of Levi's body? It shouldn't matter. To which the Gemara said, "Lav itmar Allah." So we'll see we're on Kuflan Hema Beis 155b, 5 lines down. Lav itmar Allah, now 6 lines. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rav, v'hu shenoldu bo simonei sris. No. So we'll say a very important qualification. Age and lack of simanim doesn't automatically make you a sris. In order to be categorized as a sris, you have to go ahead and be displaying other physical signs of sriskite, right? So if you look at the Rashbam, right to the left, the Rashbam, who shenoldu bo simonei sris, simana mifrasha b'yevamis, the chayvan di katarti chashvin alei kegadol, aval ben esrim shelo hevi saros. So we'll say, listen to this. This is fascinating. So failure to display signs of physical maturation is not enough to categorize you as a sris. It's, in order to be a sris, has to be lack of signs of physical maturation and other sris-like qualities. The Gemara discusses a high-pitched voice, things like this. Other signs. Ultimately, that'll make you a sris. So what's interesting is, you could be 20, not have signs of physical maturation, and not be considered a sris, which means that technically speaking, you could still be a katan in terms of real estate transactions, which makes sense in the Bnei Brak story. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Daikanami diktani v'hu asris shmamina. So Rava says, that's the lashon over here. The lashon over here is v'hu asris. Hu asris means that you have to have, so to speak, like the full SRIS package in order to go ahead and be a SRIS. And what that includes is failure to exhibit signs of physical maturation coupled with other signs of Zal. So this is really quite interesting, because what it turns out is happening over here is as follows: that whereas classically the way we operate is, right, that when a boy reaches maturity at the age of 13 years old, a girl at 14 years old, because there's assumption that at that point there's both years, what we call shanim and simanim, and physical signs of maturation. What the Gemara is highlighting over here is that halacha l'maisa, first of all, there's a heightened threshold for selling off estate real estate. You have to be older. You have to be older than that. What age? Either 18 or 20. Now, interestingly enough, furthermore, again, years by themselves are not enough. Also, you need physical signs of maturation. But yet, halacha does tell us that there is a certain point where if someone does not exhibit signs of physical maturation, they're not going to. They're not going to, and therefore they have a different halacha categorization. What is that halacha categorization? Sris. But you only get categorized as sris if you have failed to exhibit signs of physical maturation plus other sris-like qualities. At that point in time, you are considered to be a halachic adult, but a sris. Now again, being a sris doesn't change your designation except for yibam and chalitza. You wouldn't do Yibam and Chalitza. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So say, now here's a fascinating question. Let's say you have a person who, let's say again, so is older, doesn't exhibit signs of physical maturation, but also does not exhibit Sris-like qualities. So in other words, at what point in time, halachically, is that person considered to be a gadol? Right? You see this interesting idea. So on one hand, we're saying failure to exhibit signs of physical maturation coupled with other signs will designate you as a sris. What does it mean to be designated as a sris? You're a gadol. You're an adult, even without signs of physical maturation. But again, as the Gemara said, but you have to exhibit other sris-like qualities. What happens if a person is older already, no signs of physical maturation, but doesn't have sris-like qualities? At what point in time does the halacha say, okay, you're a gadol who's not a sris? To which the Gemara says, this is incredible. Tani, Rabbi Chia ad rov shnosav. This is incredible. Once you reach the majority of your years. Now take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam is like across on the left, about 8 lines down. Bechilo no dulo siman isris, v'sairos nami lo hevi, ad kama nachzikinu lo katan. So we'll say, so how long, right, up until what point will you establish someone as a katan? Because on one hand, they haven't brought signs of physical maturation, but they're also not a sris. Rov shnosav, the Rashbam says, lamid vav shanim, shem rov shivim kidichsiv, yimei shnoseno bahem shivim shana. So the Gemara says, when you reach the halfway point of life. Now, what's the halfway point of life? The Gemara says, 36. Have to this ruined the rest of my night last night, right? I would say a very overwhelming Gemara, right? At 36 years old is the halfway point of life. Like Dara Melech says, what's a lifetime? A lifetime is 70 years. So 36 is the halfway point of life. So therefore, also the Gemara says, if a person passes 36, so the might say they passed the halfway point of life. If you pass the halfway point of life, now again, and a person doesn't have simanim, but a person is also not categorized as a sris, at that point, halachically, they are categorized as a gadol, which is just a fascinating, again, there's a lot more involved in this in terms of how these things actually play out. So what does this mean? That the person can't engage transactionally? No. So again, we're looking at this in a very narrow scope in terms of selling off estate property over here. But halacha l'maisa, once a person passes 36 without simanim, but also out simanei sris, so halacha l'maisa, they are categorized as a gadol. So we'll say, so just a couple of interesting things that come out over here. So first of all, what we see is just in halacha, you almost have like these different, we'll call it benchmarks of adulthood, right? The classic benchmark, 13 years old for a boy, 12 years old for a girl. The assumption is that's shanim, years, and simanim, signs of physical maturation. We see that again, a person doesn't exhibit signs of physical maturation at the age of 20. They could be categorized as a sris, assuming that they exhibit other sris-like qualities. Then if that doesn't happen, if there's no sris-like Adamic qualities, but still no signs of physical maturation. By the age of 36, halfway through a lifetime, ultimately, again, they will be categorized as an adult. Okay, incredible. So I will say, by the way, just halacha l'maisa, the way the Rambam paskins is that 20 is the age. 20 is the age at which an heir is permitted to start selling off estate property. Now, boss, you have to understand something. Now, what's interesting about this is, we just said before that, let's say from a taltalin, even a kid who's sharp and understands could sell off. So first of all, that's in order for the child to have a means of support. But even not estate property. So you have to understand, we're going to see this more now, Chazal put in extra guardrails for estate property because they understood that what often happens in estate property, what happens? Suddenly you could have very young people in possession of a lot of money and a lot of property, and they have absolutely no life experience with what to do with it. So Chazal put guardrails on estate transactions in order that kids don't end up doing stupid things. That's pretty much what it is, right? Because when you're young and you have a lot of money, that is a recipe for disaster. So that's where these guardrails come in. So what you see by estate law very often does not apply. Like in other words, you could have a 13-year-old boy per se who goes ahead and, let's say, understands the real estate market and is buying and selling real estate, and technically speaking, his transactions are totally fine. This is unique by estate law. Okay, beautiful. I will say the other trend that's supposed to have skill, I will say is many of us, according to the Gemara, have passed the halfway point of life. So I will say, Ein wake up call Gedola Mizo. I'll say there's sometimes again you just see something so jarring, and it forces us just to reevaluate how we're living and what we're doing, and are we pushing ourselves enough? Are we accomplishing enough? Are we just just on cruise control throughout life, just coasting through without pushing ourselves enough to accomplish the things? For many of us, more than half of life is behind us. The good news is, Baruch Hashem, hopefully there's still a really beautiful and significant chunk ahead of me. But I want what's ahead of me to be better than what's behind me. But in order to do that, I have to roll up my sleeves, make a plan, and live impactfully. I can't just shuffle through life, which is the easiest way to live, and how I think most of humanity lives. Just shuffle through it. Just go day by day, put on repeat, put on cruise control. If more than half of life is behind me, it behooves me to shake myself out of my life slumber and to figure out how I want to impactfully use the rest of it. Incredible. Let's go back there. Kiasa lekamed Rabbi Chia. So it's interesting. So when somebody would come before Rabbi Chia, now interesting why they come before Rabbi Chia. So sometimes a person was older and they were not displaying signs of physical maturation. So when somebody would come to Rabbi Chia, they say, "Hey Rabbi Chia, what's going on over here?" Rabbi Chia would give them the following advice: Ikachish amr livri. If a person was very thin, Rabbi Chia would say, "Put on some weight." The ivri, and ultimately again, if they were heavy, amr lahu lichish. Rabbi Chia would say, lose some weight. Dahani simani, because interestingly enough about signs of physical maturation, dahani simani, zimnin da'asu machmas kichishusa, v'zimnin da'asi machmas beriusa. Sometimes the simanim will come when you're a little thinner, and sometimes the simanim will come when you're a little bit heavier. So we'll say, which is another way of saying it. What Rabbi Chia was saying is the best way for the body to naturally mature, ultimately again, is in a state of equilibrium, right? If a person's too fat, a person's too thin, so again, the body is not exactly as it should be, and therefore it doesn't progress in the right way. So I'll say, so by the way, if you think about it, the juxtaposition of these Gemaras are so beautiful also. Right? The Gemara just finished saying that by 36, half of life is behind you. So it's almost as if in the next line Rabbi Chia gives, so what's the recipe for maximizing life? The recipe is balance. The recipe is always balance, right? Sometimes, again, when we want to maximize something, we go to extremes, and extremes never really work. Sometimes you need an extreme in order to balance something out, but the goal is always balance, right? Rabbi Chia says, you want simanim, right? You think about this. What's a siman? A siman is a sign of physical maturation. So you want life maturation. You want life maturation. You want to grow. You want to grow. Can't be too fat. Can't be too thin. Can't have too much. Can't have too little. Life is all about moderation. Like the Rambam says, life life is all about the derech hamamutza, the middle path. If you're able to find the right middle path of life, if you're able to navigate this beautiful balance between your gashmius and your ruchnius, if you're able to go ahead and find this golden mean, right, then ultimately, again, that's where success comes from. That's where simonim, that's where signs of physical life, signs of development, signs of growth ultimately come from. It's incredible. We'll say, the beauty of what we do every single day, like the Gemara says, hafach ba v'hafach ba dekula ba. Everything you need to be successful in life is in Gemara. It's all here. The halacha is here, the hashkaf is here. You just have to know where to look for it and how to find it. Incredible. Ibailu, Gemara goes right there. Ibailu, as kasha, tochzman, kilifnei zman, kula achar zman. So it says, here's the shaila. So we just established before, right? There's a machlokes as to what is the right age, or what is the age in which you're allowed to go ahead and sell off a state property. So machlokes, 18 or 20. So it's essentially independent of whether you hold 18 or 20. Here's the shaila. What about during the 18th year or during the 20th year? So you're in the middle, you're in that year. So do we say, is tochzmano is in the 18th year, like before the 18th year, or 20? But I'm using 18, 20, or 18 and 20 interchangeably. So do we say that in the 18th year is like before the 18th year, or like after the 18th year? So Rava Amar Nachman, Toch Zman Kilifnei Zman. When you're in the year, it's as if you're before the year. So in other words, in the 18th year is like before the 18th year. In the 20th year is like before the 20th year. Rava bar Rav Shila Amar Nachman Toch Zman Kila Achar Zman. They'll know in the year, in the 18th or 20th year is like being after the 18th and 20th year, and therefore their transactions will hold. Rava's statement of being in the 18th year is like before the 18th year, and therefore you're transactionally inept. That wasn't said explicitly, but rather again, that was inferred from the following Maisa. Watch this. Dahu Toch Zman the Azal Zabin Nichse. There was a kid, there was an heir, and he was within the 18th year, whatever we'll say, whether it's in the 18th or in the 20th, doesn't matter. It's the same conceptual question. He was in his 18th year, and he went and he sold property, he sold the state property, and the case came before Rava, Amar Lahu Lo Asa V'Lo Klum. So Rava said, the transaction is meaningless. Now, man de chaza savra mishra, we'll say first white line, the talks man kilif nizman. Now, one who saw this figured, why did Rava say the transaction is meaningless? Why? Because it must be that something you do during your 18th year is like what? Something you do before your 18th year, and therefore it's transactionally void. Velohi, that's not the reason. I will say this is great. Velohi, no. Do you know why Rava paskin that the transaction was void? Hasam shtusa yiseirasa chazube. What did he see in this kid who did the transaction? That he was foolish. He saw that the kid did not know what he was doing transactionally. He didn't understand property, he didn't understand real estate. And therefore Rava ruled that he was mentally inept. The transaction wasn't good because he did not know what he was doing transactionally. Now we'll say, what did the kid do that led Rava to see this? He freed his Eved Kanani. Now we'll say, first of all, it's an Isra D'Oraisa to free your Eved Kanani, and number two, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So Rava saw this kid engaging in transactions that were illogical. So because that, Rava ruled his sale void, because Rava felt that the kid did not know what he was doing. This has nothing to do with in the 18th year, after the 18th year, before the 18th year. That's not the discussion. Discussion at hand over here is Rava seeing a kid who was not really capable of going ahead and making proper transactional decisions. Beautiful. So let's go right there. So Shalach le'gil bar Menashe l'Rava. So I always say, just so you should know, just the way the Rambam Paskins is like Rava, that within the 18th year is considered to be like before the 18th year. So really what it means is when we talk about 18 and 20, really what it means is 19 and 21, right? That's really what it means. After the 18th year, after the 20th year. Okay, the next case. Second wide line, Kuf Ne'em Beis. Exciting Gemara. Shalach like Gil bar Menashe l'Rava. So Gil bar Menashe asks following kasha of Rava. Yalam din Rabbeinu, Rebbe teach us. Tinokes bas arboes reishon v'yom echad. Listen to this. Let's say you have a girl who is 14 years old in one day. That's her age. Yodas betiv masa umatan. And she knows business. She's got a business cup, right? She knows, she understands business. So the Gemara says, Mahu. So I'll say, so what happens if she's engaging in transactions, right? What is the halacha? Right? Are her transactions valid? Shalach lei im yodas betiv masu matan mikra mekach umemkra mimkar. Yeah, listen, if this girl knows business and it's clear that she demonstrates an understanding of what it is that she is doing, then halacha l'maisa, her transactions stand. Her transactions stand. So the Gemara says, good. So they asked Gidol Babanashi, why are you asking that? Why are you asking about a girl? Why don't you ask about a boy? In other words, just Gemara-wise, it would seem more common to ask about a boy than ask about a girl. So why are you doing that? To which the Gemara said, no. This was a case that came up. In other words, Gidol Bar Menashe is not inventing a case. This was a case that came up, so he just asked the case as it appeared. But if you want to ask the question, don't ask about a girl who's 14 years old. Rather, ask about a girl who's what? 12 years old in one day. That's when she becomes a Gidola. Why don't you ask about that case? To which the Gemara once again says, No. Again, Gidol Bar Menashe is not inventing a question. He's asking as the case actually unfolded. So the Gemara says, "Hahu pachos mi ben esim da'azol zabin nichse." We'll say this is a great case. Listen, there was a kid, a guy, boy, man, person, right, who was less than 20 years old. Okay, so we'll say, remember again, going with the idea that 20 years old really is the age in which you can begin to sell estate property. So there was a guy, there was a boy, a man who was less than 20 years old. Da'azol zabin nichse. He sold his property, his father's property, in accordance with the position of Gidol Bar Menashe. Right? Because also remember again, Gidol Bar Menashe holds, like we just saw before, that although we just said 18 and 20 are the ages for real estate sales, if you find a young person who has business acumen, they understand what they're doing, they're clearly demonstrating a transactional understanding, their transactions are good, are valid. So therefore this boy, this young man, less than 20 years old, sold off real estate property, sold off estate property. Okay, fine. Amru lekrove, zil achol tamre, v'shadi bekashasa beirava. So now watch this. Now his relatives were upset. Now it happened to be this kid knew what he was doing, but the relatives were upset. They did not want him to sell the estate property. So the relatives gave him an eitzah. They said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to bring this case in front of Rava. Here's what I want you to do. They said, eat some dates and throw the pits in Rava's house. Throw the pits in Rava's house. Now, I will say, now, generally, if somebody eats dates and throws the pits in your house, what are you going to think about such a person like that? They're just like not holding, right? They're not holding. So that was the point of this. So they wanted this kid, he was not a kid, a young man, to do something that showed that he was a little bit mentally not fully there. And therefore Rava would go ahead and void the transaction. So Avad Hachi, so sure enough, this is what the kid did. Then the case came before Rava. Amr lahu zivine lav zivine. So Rava paskined, the sale is not a good sale. So in other words, it worked. It worked. So, right, so the kids, it's not, the kids' actions worked, and Rava said, obviously, this young man doesn't know what he's doing, and therefore, Allah Chalamai said the transaction is void. Listen to this. So, Kika Kasvule Shtara, Amrele Lekuchos, Zil Emalei Rava, Megilas Esther Bezuza, Shtari Dimar Bezuza. So now Rava was writing up the decision of the Beis Din. He was writing up the decision of the Beis Din. Now, obviously, when the decision of the Beis Din was made, so the litigants had a responsibility ultimately to go ahead and pay for the shtar. So what happened? So the krovi lekuchos, the relatives of the purchaser. So now remember again, the transaction was about to be voided. So the relatives of the purchaser come over to the young man and they say, you know what? You should really negotiate with Rava a little bit, and you should say to Rava the following. Here's what you say to Rava. Rava, you know, you're charging me one zuz for a shtar. You could get an entire Megillas Esther written for one zuz. In other words, your prices are a little bit too high for what you're charging me for the shtar. So Amr Lehu, so the Gemara says, Amr Le Krove Le Kuchos Agmaru. So I'm sorry, Azul Amr Le Lehu Zvine Zvine. So Azul Amr Le Lehu Zvine Zvine. So the boy went back to Rava, and Rava said, oh, you know what? I changed my psak. The transaction was a good transaction. Rava said, obviously, to this kid, you know what you're talking about business-wise, right? If you're coming back to me, you're telling me that I'm charging you too much for the shtar because you can get a whole Megillah Bas Esther for a zuz, and you want 1 zuz for the shtar, that shows that the kid is transactionally holding, which means the sale was good. Now the relatives of the kid say back, Amrulei krovi lekuchos agmaru. Come on, he's being coached. Right? So you hear this? You hear this? So the relatives of the kid are claiming the kid is being coached. Now, by the way, what's the irony in this? What's the irony in this? They also coached him to throw date pits into Rava's house, which is just weird, right? So the Maisa again, so they're claiming the kid doesn't know what he's talking about. He's being coached to claim that you're charging me too much for the shtar. So the Gemara says, Amrlahu, Masbrilu Savar, Kevan the Masbrilu Savar, made the Yada. So Rava says, you're right. Even if he's being coached, at the end of the day, he's demonstrating his understanding. In other words, you're right. I understand they're coaching him to say, you could get a whole Megillah for a zuz. Why are you charging me 1 zuz for a shtar? But Lamaisa, when they tell him it, he understands it and he executes it, which indicates a level of comprehension. If he has comprehension, how do you understand the whole date pit Maisa? The high David Hachi, chutzbah Rabbi says, I clearly see now the throwing of the dates into my house ultimately again was not because he is transactionally incompetent, but rather what? It's just good old chutzpah, right? Good old chutzpah, nothing to do with his transactional competence, but clearly again he just has an additional amount, an extra measure of chutzpah. That's why he's showing the dates, and Rava certified the transaction. I will say, okay, we'll stop over here for today. More again, we're not finished yet. Much more on the sugya tomorrow. Miras Hashem, exciting day ahead tomorrow. Shkayach everyone. All right, Chaim Ranzim, have a great day.